talk about old movies, playing on his phone, admiring the assets of other men. Meanwhile, President Musk can get down to the business of running the country.
And to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God.
We at the Lincoln Project are confident that Donald Trump understands his position. Elon is smarter, wealthier, more charismatic, has a far superior and more successful social media platform and company.
The Lincoln Project just demonstrated something absolutely fascinating about Trump's brain. It's completely hackable. With just one carefully crafted ad, they sent the former president into such a rage spiral that witnesses described him as having an out-of-body experience. In the next few minutes, I'm going to break down the 3 specific triggers they used in this ad, making Trump look weak, ridiculous, and controlled by Putin. These are literally his 3 biggest psychological vulnerabilities, and when hit simultaneously, they shattered his famously fragile ego in spectacular fashion. Hey, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button. We know you want to. Go ahead, we'll wait. Alright, appreciate it. Now, back to the video. What if I told you some former Republicans figured out exactly how to break Trump's brain with just one ad? Like finding the secret code to make a robot malfunction, these guys unlocked the Trump Meltdown playbook, and boy did they use it perfectly. The Lincoln Project isn't your average political group. These folks used to be Republican insiders, the same people who helped build the party Trump now controls, but they decided Trump was too dangerous and turned their insider knowledge against him.
You want to make any comment about this Lincoln Project ad?
Yeah, no, I saw it. They should call it the Losers Project.
Let's lay that into rapid response.
The Lincoln Project salutes Vice President Donald Trump. As Vice President, Trump will finally have the time to do the things that make him happiest.
You know, the White House is more than just a building. It's more than 18 acres of land in Washington, D.C.
Talk about knowing where all the bodies are buried. These guys didn't just understand Republican politics. They understood Trump's fragile ego better than anyone. When they crafted their Comrade Trump ad, they weren't just throwing random mud. No, this was precision psychological warfare. They studied Trump like scientists observing a lab specimen. What makes him tick? What keeps him up at night? What turns his face that special shade of spray tan orange rage? They identified his 3 biggest fears: looking weak, the ultimate Trump nightmare; appearing incompetent, despite constantly telling us he's a very stable genius; and seeming ridiculous. Ironic for a guy with that hairstyle, but I digress. The ad itself, pure psychological torture for Trump. It portrayed him as Putin's little puppet, a grown man with a powerful Russian hand controlling his every move. For someone obsessed with projecting strength and dominance, being portrayed as submissive is kryptonite. Every frame showed Trump as small, controlled, and manipulated, like watching someone else play with your favorite action figure while you're stuck watching helplessly. But here's where they went from clever to diabolical. They didn't just make a good ad, they designed the perfect delivery system. These Lincoln Project folks knew Trump's TV viewing habits better than his own family. They knew exactly when his eyeballs would be glued to the screen during his famous executive time, which we all know means watching cable news in his bathrobe. They strategically bought airtime during these hours on channels they knew he watched. Not nationwide, that would be wasteful. They targeted DC and Palm Beach, specifically around Mar-a-Lago where Trump spends so much time. This wasn't broadcasting, this was narrowcasting directly into Trump's brain, like leaving a single piece of toilet paper stuck to your enemy's shoe right before their big speech. The Lincoln Project understood something crucial about Trump. He physically cannot ignore criticism. Most politicians develop thick skin, learning to tune out attacks. Not Trump. He's like that kid on the playground who absolutely loses it when someone makes fun of his new sneakers. The ad exploited this weakness masterfully, knowing Trump would be physically unable to look away or change the channel. Every element was calculated to trigger maximum insecurity. The imagery of Putin controlling him hit his masculinity buttons hard. The suggestion that he's not really in charge attacked his need to be seen as the alpha boss. And the ridicule factor. For a man who has spent his entire life terrified of being laughed at, it was unbearable. What makes this psychological operation truly brilliant is how it exposed the paper-thin nature of Trump's confidence. For all his bluster and bravado, these former Republicans proved that beneath the tough guy act is a deeply insecure man who can be completely undone by a single commercial. They didn't need to spend millions on nationwide ads. They just needed to ensure one ad reached an audience of one. The Lincoln Project essentially made an appointment with Trump's psyche. They knew exactly which buttons to push, when to push them, and where he would be when they did it. It's like they had a map of his insecurities with precise coordinates. And when the missile hit its target, total psychological meltdown. Trump's vicious counterattacks against the Lincoln Project only proved their strategy worked. Each angry tweet, each rally rant about rhinos and losers was confirmation they'd gotten under his skin. They baited the hook and he bit down hard, thrashing around and only driving the hook deeper, all while they sat back and watched their plan unfold exactly as designed. While Trump was publicly ranting about rhinos and losers, what unfolded in private was something straight out of a psychological horror movie. The self-proclaimed very stable genius reportedly transformed into something resembling a malfunctioning robot when his eyes first locked onto that Lincoln Project ad. It's like watching someone who claims they're amazing at basketball completely fall apart the moment they actually have to shoot a hoop under pressure. According to multiple sources who witnessed Trump's initial reaction, the former president didn't just get mad. He suffered what one staffer described as a complete system shutdown. When the ad first played on the TV screen at Mar-a-Lago, witnesses report Trump went completely silent for approximately 30 seconds, an eternity for a man who typically can't stop talking. Then came what one source called the meltdown of all meltdowns. His face reportedly turned what one witness colorfully described as a bright tomato red shade, not the usual orange tint we've come to know. The sweat began pouring down his face so profusely that one aide was dispatched to fetch extra napkins. But the physical reaction was just the beginning. What happened next revealed just how deeply the Lincoln Project had pierced Trump's psychological armor. It was like watching someone have an out-of-body experience, said one source who was present but requested anonymity. The president couldn't even form complete sentences for nearly 10 minutes. Instead, according to this witness, Trump just kept sputtering fragments like, "These people, these terrible, look what they're... Who does this?" While attempting to dial his phone, he reportedly dropped it twice because his hands were shaking so badly. Another witness described how Trump kept rewinding and replaying the ad, subjecting himself to the very poison that was causing his meltdown. He must have watched it 7 times back to back, said the source, each time getting more and more worked up, but he couldn't stop himself from watching it again. This compulsive behavior reveals something particularly fascinating about Trump's psychology. He seems pathologically unable to look away from things that wound him. What makes this reaction especially revealing isn't just its intensity, but how it contrasts with Trump's carefully constructed public persona. This is a man who brands himself as unshakable, who constantly tells us he's the strongest, toughest leader around. Yet behind closed doors, a single commercial reduced him to what one staffer described as a sweaty, red-faced mess, who couldn't string together a coherent thought. The Lincoln Project didn't just make an ad. They performed amateur psychological surgery without anesthesia. They cut straight through the bravado to expose the raw, unfiltered Trump beneath. One source who's known Trump for years put it this way: "I've seen him angry plenty of times, but this was different. This wasn't just anger. It was like watching someone's identity collapse." Perhaps most revealing was what happened after Trump regained his ability to speak in full sentences. Rather than dismissing the ad as insignificant, which would be the typical political response, he reportedly became obsessed with who exactly had funded it, demanding detailed dossiers on each Lincoln Project member. He wanted to know everything about them, their families, their finances, their weaknesses, said a former aide. It wasn't just about countering their message, it was deeply personal for him. The extent of Trump's fixation became clear when he allegedly called 3 separate Fox News personalities past midnight to complain about the ad. One reportedly had to gently remind the former president that it was 2:15 a.m. Even more telling, according to sources close to Trump, he brought up the ad unprompted in conversations for weeks afterward, often in contexts that had nothing to do with politics. This isn't just a funny story about a man with a fragile ego. It reveals something profound about Trump's psychological makeup. Politicians typically develop thick skin, the ability to let criticism roll off their backs. But Trump seems to have developed the opposite, a hypersensitivity to any perceived slight coupled with an absolute inability to ignore it. For someone seeking to become president again, this represents a dangerous vulnerability that foreign adversaries could easily exploit. The Lincoln Project proves something valuable. You don't need sophisticated psyops to manipulate Trump, you just need to know which buttons to push. The ease with which they triggered this meltdown raises serious questions about how a second Trump presidency might function. Would important global decisions be made based on careful consideration of America's interests, or as emotional reactions to whoever most recently wounded Trump's ego? While Trump was having his crisis in the open, another explosion was happening behind the gilded doors of Mar-a-Lago. We've all seen Melania's permanently frozen face. Her signature look that's like she's constantly posing for an invisible Vogue photographer even during national emergencies. But sources say that perfect mask completely shattered when she saw the Lincoln Project ad. Multiple Mar-a-Lago staff members reported something shocking that day. The sound of Melania Trump shouting so loudly they could hear her through multiple walls. But here's the kicker, she wasn't yelling in English. According to these sources, Melania completely abandoned the language of her adopted country and reverted to rapid-fire Slovenian curses that staff members described as intense and terrifying, even though they couldn't understand a word. I've worked at Mar-a-Lago for 3 years, and I've never heard Mrs. Trump raise her voice above a whisper, said one source who requested anonymity. That day, it was like someone flipped a switch. I don't know what she was saying, but you don't need a translation to recognize rage. The former First Lady didn't just lose her voice control. Staff described hearing objects crashing against walls. One housekeeping staff member later discovered 3 broken crystal figurines and a shattered photo frame containing a picture of Donald and Melania at an inaugural ball. I guess we now know how she really feels about those memories. This wasn't just a small crack in her icy demeanor. This was Melania completely abandoning the carefully constructed Ice Queen routine she's maintained for years. For comparison, this is a woman who barely changed her expression when a balloon popped next to her at a White House event and who wore a jacket saying, "I really don't care, do you?" to visit migrant children. Yet something about seeing her husband portrayed as Putin's puppet triggered genuine, unfiltered emotion. More context comes from an unexpected source. Anthony the Mooch Scaramucci, who lasted approximately 15 minutes as White House communications director before Trump fired him. In recent interviews, the Mooch hasn't held back about what he believes is the true state of the Trump marriage. Melania hates Donald with the fire of 1,000 suns, Scaramucci told a podcast host earlier this year. When I meet people who say they can't stand Trump, I always measure it against what I call the Melania standard. And nobody, I mean nobody, hates Donald Trump more than his own wife. Scaramucci also claimed that staff at Trump properties have witnessed similar outbursts before, saying Melania drops the act when she thinks no one important is watching. The staff know the real story, he said. They see how she recoils from his touch when the cameras aren't around, how she rolls her eyes when he starts talking. The Mooch went even further, telling CNN, "Their marriage is like one of those nature documentaries where the female spider tolerates the male just long enough to get what she needs, then considers eating him." Dang, Mooch, tell us how you really feel. What's particularly fascinating about Melania's reaction is that it seems she wasn't just upset about the ad itself. Sources claim she was furious about having to deal with Trump's tantrum afterward. She kept saying something that sounded like "not again" in English between the Slovenian parts, said one source. It was like she was mad that she had to handle the fallout from his meltdown. This glimpse behind the velvet curtain raises serious questions about just how much of the Trump marriage is real versus performance art. For years, body language experts have analyzed clips of Melania swatting away Trump's hand or grimacing when he turns away. But those tiny moments are nothing compared to this full meltdown that staff described as a tornado of Slovenian fury. The timing couldn't be more interesting as controversial director Brett Ratner recently announced he's working on a documentary about Melania. Ratner, who faced his own number Me Too accusations in 2017, seems an odd choice to capture the story of a woman whose husband has faced dozens of sexual misconduct allegations. The bigger question is, will this documentary show the real Melania, the one who throws crystal figurines and curses in Slovenian, or will it continue the carefully crafted public image? So we've seen how Trump's tiny brain melted down over a simple ad. Who knew a big tough guy like him could be broken so easily? The Lincoln Project didn't just make a commercial, they provided a blueprint for how fragile and manipulable the former president really is. This whole episode should worry anyone considering voting for him again. Think about it, if a TV ad can turn him into a babbling mess, imagine what real pressure would do. Putin and Kim Jong-un must be laughing their heads off. When a supposed leader can't handle criticism without exploding, that tells you everything you need to know.